Under the hot studio lights of Burbank, amidst the clouds of cigarette smoke and the sharp wit of a Midwestern king, there were nights when the laughter died down, and for a fleeting, breathless moment, the world witnessed something much more dangerous than a joke: a genuine human connection. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the impenetrable sun around which Hollywood's brightest stars orbited. But what happens when the professional mask slips? Behind the iconic Heere's Johnny lay a stage that served as a confessional for the brokenhearted and a pedestal for the smitten. Was it all just a curated performance for the Nielsen ratings, or were we catching glimpses of souls truly intertwined? Tonight, we peel back the curtain on the legendary, the iconic, and the unresolved tensions of The Tonight Show. These were the moments where the king of late night met the queen of hearts. The First Lady of Song, Ella Fitzgerald's Serenade. The curtains of The Tonight Show stage were more than just velvet barriers. They were the gateway to a kingdom where Johnny Carson sat as the ultimate arbiter of cool. In this high-stakes environment, few guests possessed the gravity to make the king of late night lean back and simply listen. Ella Fitzgerald was one of those rare icons. By the time she graced Johnny's couch in the mid-1970s, she was already the undisputed matriarch of jazz. She was a woman whose voice had been described as a gift from the heavens, a technical marvel that could navigate the most complex bebop scales while maintaining the warmth of a lullaby. She carried with her the weight of the golden age of Hollywood and the smoky resilience of Harlem's jazz clubs, standing as a living monument to American musical excellence. Yet, despite her towering status, there was always a sense of profound humility about her, a quiet dignity that seemed to demand a different kind of respect from the usually sharp-witted host. The moment that etched itself into the show's romantic history occurred during a performance that felt remarkably stripped back for a television broadcast. As the orchestra began a gentle, rhythmic swell, Ella didn't just sing to the millions watching at home. She seemed to direct the full force of her lyrical affection toward Johnny himself. It was a performance of "Do Nothin' Till You Hear From Me," and as she navigated the melody, she turned her body toward the host's desk. The banter that followed was not the standard promotional chatter. Instead, it was a rhythmic dance of mutual adoration. Johnny, who was notoriously difficult to impress and often maintained a professional distance, appeared visibly softened. His usual defensive posture dissolved, replaced by the gaze of a man truly enchanted. The sensory atmosphere of the studio changed during these minutes. The air felt heavy and thick, saturated with the scent of expensive perfume and the restless energy of a live audience, realizing they were witnessing an intimate exchange. There was a palpable shift in the room, as if the oxygen had been replaced by the velvet texture of Ella's vibrato. You could sense a tragic irony in the scene. Here was a woman who sang of perfect, cinematic love with such conviction that it moved a nation, yet her own life was often characterized by a profound artistic isolation. The cold spots of the sterile television studio seemed to vanish under the radiant warmth of her scatting. Every note felt like a heartbeat, and for a few minutes, the cynical world of show business felt secondary to the genuine human connection happening under the spotlights. The interaction concluded on a note of quiet, humanizing grace. As the song ended and the applause thundered, Ella looked at Johnny with a vulnerability that few ever saw. Behind the legendary vocal runs and the joyful smiles, there was a lingering look in her eyes, an unfinished business that spoke of a woman who found her truest companionship only when the music was playing. Johnny reached out to take her hand, a gesture that felt less like a host dismissing a guest and more like a friend offering a silent thank you for a moment of shared peace. It was a reminder that even for a king and a queen, the most romantic thing in the world is simply being truly heard. But while Ella brought the soul, our next guest brought a fire that threatened to burn the entire set down. leading to a confrontation so intimate it remains the show's most whispered about encounter. The heartbreaking waltz, Bette Davis, and the final flame. When Bette Davis stepped onto The Tonight Show stage for her final visits in the late 1980s, the audience was not merely greeting an actress. They were witnessing the defiant sunset of a cinematic empire. Known as the First Lady of the American screen, Davis was the architect of the strong-willed, uncompromising woman in film. By this stage in her life, she was a grand dame of Hollywood, whose face carried the geography of 1,000 battles fought against studio heads, directors, and the cruel passage of time. She had survived strokes, cancer, and the stinging betrayal of a tell-all book by her own daughter. Yet, as she took her seat across from Johnny, the sharp edges of her public persona seemed to soften into something far more fragile and haunting. This was the golden age in its winter years, flickering like a candle in a drafty room, desperate to cast one last magnificent shadow. The specific moment that remains etched in the show's legacy occurred during a 1988 appearance, which many consider one of the most emotional segments in late-night history. Davis was 80 years old and physically frail, but her spirit remained a towering inferno. During the interview, she looked at Johnny with a vulnerability that completely contradicted her tough-as-nails reputation. It was a conversation that transcended the typical promotional circuit. In a rare display of raw humanity, she spoke of her regrets and the isolation of being a legend whose peers had almost all vanished into the history books. It was a romanticism of the era, a final desperate grasp at the glamour and connection they both knew was rapidly fading from the world. Johnny, usually the master of the quick quip, found himself uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes reflecting a deep and somber respect for the woman sitting before him. The sensory details of the studio that night were thick with an almost paranormal gravity. There was a watchful presence in her gaze, a sharp and chilling realization that the curtains were closing for good. The smoke from her cigarette did not just drift, it curled like a phantom in the harsh spotlight, creating an eerie halo around a woman who refused to be forgotten. The studio air felt smaller and more claustrophobic, as if the very walls were leaning in to hear her last secrets before they were lost to time. You could almost feel the restless energy of the audience, who had stopped laughing at her barbs and were instead held in a grip of tragic irony. Here was the most powerful woman in the history of the silver screen, now navigating the twilight of her life on a talk show couch, proving that even icons are subject to the chilling silence of the end. This interaction provided a masterclass in the heartbreak of a legacy. It was a humanizing conclusion to a career built on armor and fire. Beneath the signature bold eyeliner and the clipped theatrical delivery, we saw a woman realizing that her only remaining suitor was the camera itself. Johnny was merely the usher for her final bow, a role he played with a gentle, understated grace that honored her dignity. Their exchange was a silent acknowledgement of the loneliness that comes with outliving your own time. When she finally waved goodbye, it felt like more than just a guest leaving the set. It felt like the formal departure of an entire century of Hollywood royalty, leaving behind an empty chair and a lingering sense of unfinished business. Davis left the stage in a cloud of smoke, but she left behind a question. Can a scripted interview ever truly hide a real-life obsession? The answer arrived in the form of a blonde bombshell who didn't follow the rules. The unscripted spark, Burt Reynolds and the art of the lean. If The Tonight Show was a theater of high art and carefully managed personas, Burt Reynolds was the wrecking ball that made the demolition look like a party. In the mid-1970s, Reynolds was more than just a movie star. He was the personification of a new, rugged American masculinity that didn't take itself too seriously. He was the rogue with the golden smile, the man who could pose for a scandalous centerfold one day and deliver a powerhouse performance the next. When he walked through those curtains, he didn't just inhabit the space, he claimed it. His relationship with Johnny Carson was a fascinating study in contrast and chemistry. While Johnny was the polished, slightly reserved Midwesterner, Burt was the tactile, unpredictable force of nature. Together, they created a bromance decades before the word entered the cultural lexicon, fueled by a playful, high-stakes flirtation with the boundaries of live television. The core of this romanticized tension was found in what fans often called the art of the lean. Unlike most guests who sat upright and waited for questions, Reynolds would drape himself across the couch, often leaning into Johnny's personal space with a mischievous glint in his eye. One of the most famous examples of this occurred during a 1974 appearance where Burt, in a fit of improvised hilarity, began spraying Johnny with whipped cream during a skit. The interaction was not just about the prank. It was about the way Burt looked at Johnny afterward. There was a genuine electric affection in the way they traded barbs. It was a high-wire act of two predators recognizing one another in the wild, each testing how far they could push the other before the laughter turned into something else. The sensory details of these appearances were legendary. You could almost hear the restless energy of the studio audience, a collective intake of breath every time Burt broke the third wall or touched Johnny's arm to make a point. The studio lights seemed to catch the glint of his gold chains and the sheer confidence in his posture, creating a vivid atmosphere of 1970s bravado. There was a certain tragic irony buried beneath the laughter, however. While they appeared to be the two most confident men on the planet, there was a sense that this camaraderie was a necessary shield against the isolating pressures of their immense fame. The watchful presence of the cameras meant that their friendship was always a performance, yet the moments where they forgot the audience existed felt chillingly real. The interesting part of the Reynolds-Carson saga was the realization that behind the mustache and the swagger was a man deeply concerned with being liked. Burt wasn't just there to plug a film. He was a restless soul, searching for a sense of belonging in the approval of a man he clearly admired. When he finally leaned back and let out that signature laugh, it wasn't for the fans at home, it was for Johnny. This was the romance of friendship in its most masculine yet vulnerable form, proving that the most iconic connections on The Tonight Show often happened between the lines of the script. If Burt was the fire, our next guest was the moonlight, and her appearance would spark rumors that followed Johnny all the way to his private estate in Malibu. The Quiet Confession, Angie Dickinson's late-night glow. When Angie Dickinson glided onto the set of The Tonight Show, the atmosphere underwent a visible transformation. She was the quintessential star of the 1970s and 80s, embodying a sophisticated, effortless glamour that made her a perennial favorite of both the audience and the host. As the star of Policewoman, she was a pioneer for female leads in action roles, but on Johnny's couch, she was something entirely different. She was the personification of the girl next door, if that neighbor happened to be a world-class beauty with a razor-sharp wit. Dickinson possessed a rare ability to bridge the gap between being a distant Hollywood icon and a relatable, warm presence. Her chemistry with Johnny was not based on pranks or loud laughter, but on a simmer of intellectual and romantic tension that felt incredibly private, despite the millions of spectators watching from their bedrooms. The specific interaction that highlighted this late-night glow often occurred during the quieter segments of their interviews. Unlike the high-energy comedians who preceded her, Angie had a way of slowing down the tempo of the show. One of the most talked-about moments involved a conversation where the two discussed the nature of fame and the difficulty of finding a genuine connection in Hollywood. The way Johnny adjusted his tie and leaned in closer than usual, and the way Angie shifted her weight while maintaining steady, unwavering eye contact suggested a deep familiarity. According to some who worked behind the scenes, the air between them was practically combustible. It was a conversation that felt less like a televised interview and more like a post-dinner date where the rest of the world had simply melted away. Under the studio lights, the environment felt uncharacteristically soft, as if the sharp edges of the cameras and microphones had been blurred. There was a tragic irony in their easy rapport. Here were two people who seemed perfectly matched in intellect and charm, yet they were separated by the very medium that brought them together. You could almost feel the watchful presence of the public's expectations, a silent pressure that kept their flirtation within the bounds of good television. The studio air, usually vibrating with the nervous energy of live performance, became still and focused. It was an eerie kind of intimacy, a shared secret broadcast to a nation of voyeurs. Through his interactions with Angie, we saw a glimpse of a man who was capable of genuine, gentle affection. It was a portrait of what many fans perceived as the one that got away, a silent acknowledgement of the loneliness that often accompanies extreme success. Dickinson remained one of the few guests who could make Johnny blush, a feat that spoke volumes about their connection. Their time together on screen served as a poignant reminder that even in the bright lights of Burbank, the most profound moments are often the ones whispered in the quiet intervals between the jokes. But even the most polished Hollywood stars could be upstaged by a raw, unrefined emotion, and that's exactly what happened when a young comedian turned a set into a sanctuary. The Prodigal Son's Return, Garry Shandling's vulnerable debut. In the spring of 1981, a relatively unknown comedian named Garry Shandling walked through the curtains and changed the trajectory of his life forever. At the time, The Tonight Show was the ultimate gatekeeper of comedic success, and Johnny Carson was the high priest who could grant instant stardom with a single wave to the couch. Shandling arrived with a persona that was a masterclass in nervous, high-strung vulnerability. He didn't come with the bravado of the old-school showman. Instead, he brought a dry, deadpan humor that felt like a quiet confession of his own neuroses. To the audience, he was the everyman in a suit that didn't quite fit his anxiety. But to Johnny, he was a reflection of the intellectual precision required to make the world laugh at its own discomfort. This was the beginning of a romance of mentorship, a professional love story between a legend and the protege who would eventually become one of his most frequent guest hosts. The specific moment that remains a cornerstone of the show's emotional history was Shandling's television debut on March 18, 1981. After a set that left the audience in stitches, Johnny didn't just offer the customary polite applause. He signaled for Garry to take a seat on the couch, a gesture that, in the hierarchy of Burbank, was equivalent to being knighted. The way Shandling looked at Johnny during that first interview was a raw display of seeking approval. You could see the sheer adoration in his eyes, a mixture of fear and profound respect. Johnny, in turn, looked at the young comic with a genuine paternal warmth that was rare for the often guarded host. It was a meeting of minds that felt less like a job interview and more like a homecoming. The studio atmosphere that night was charged with a restless, nervous edge. You could almost feel the watchful presence of Johnny's approval hanging over the stage, like a heavy velvet curtain. There was a tragic irony in Garry's performance. He was making millions of people laugh by highlighting his own loneliness and social failures. The cold spots of the high-pressure industry seemed to thaw instantly when Johnny finally let out a genuine, belly-deep laugh at one of Garry's observations. The sensory experience was one of relief, as if the entire room had been holding its breath until the king gave his blessing. It was a chillingly beautiful transition from an unknown performer to a member of the inner circle. This man spent his entire career trying to live up to the standards set by his mentor. The unfinished business of their relationship was a deep, often painful love, built on the pursuit of comedic truth. Shandling would go on to host the show many times, but he always returned to that first night as the moment he felt truly seen. It was a reminder that behind the jokes and the sketches, the most enduring connections are built on the simple, vulnerable desire to make a legend smile. But mentorship is one thing. A legend looking at his successor with genuine, tear-filled adoration is quite another. And that brings us to the night the music almost stopped. The swan song, Bette Midler's final lullaby. By May 21, 1992, The air in NBC's Studio One was thick with the weight of an era coming to an end. Johnny Carson was retiring, and for his penultimate show, he invited one of his all-time favorite entertainers, Bette Midler. Midler, the divine Miss M, was known for her brassy, high-energy performances and her unapologetic bawdiness. But on this night, she chose to shed the persona of the comic firebrand. She appeared as a woman paying tribute to a man who had been her champion for decades. It was the golden age taking its final, deep breath. The studio was filled with an audience that knew they were witnessing history, and the emotional gravity of the room was so intense, it felt as though the very air was vibrating with the sorrow of a long goodbye. The crowning moment of the night, and perhaps the most romantic gesture in the history of television, was Midler's performance of One for My Baby and One More for the Road. Sitting on a stool next to Johnny's desk, she sang directly to him, her voice cracking with a genuine, unscripted emotion. Johnny, usually the Iceman who kept his feelings behind a wall of Midwestern reserve, sat visibly moved, his eyes glistening with tears. It was a rare, raw crack in his armor. The song wasn't just a musical number. It was a final, public confession of a deep and abiding friendship. For those few minutes, the millions watching at home were merely eavesdropping on a private farewell between two people who truly loved one another. Their performance was hauntingly beautiful. The studio was eerily silent, the usual clinking of glasses and rustle of production staff having vanished into a chilling stillness. The blue stage light caught the moisture in Johnny's eyes and the trembling of Bette's lips, creating a scene of tragic irony. Here was a man who had spent 30 years being the life of the party, now forced to sit in the quiet of his own departure. You could feel a watchful, almost ghostly presence in the rafters, as if the spirits of 30 years of guests were leaning in to hear the final notes. The air felt cold yet charged, a restless energy that signaled the end of a cultural constant. This was the heartbreak of a legacy captured in real time. The humanizing conclusion of the night was the realization that even the most powerful man in the media was, at the end of the day, a man who would miss his friends. Midler's lullaby served as the perfect bookend to a career built on connection. It was a reminder that the true romance of The Tonight Show wasn't found in the scripted flirtations, but in the genuine tears of a friend saying goodbye. As the final note faded, it left behind a profound sense of unfinished business, the silence of an empty stage that would never feel quite the same again. It was the perfect goodbye. Or was it? Because long before the farewells, there was one night in 1969 that changed the history of the show forever. A moment of romance so real it nearly broke the broadcast. The Tiny Tim wedding, a surreal kind of love. On December 17, 1969, The Tonight Show hosted an event so bizarre and yet so strangely touching that it remains a pinnacle of surreal television history: the wedding of Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky. Tiny Tim was the ultimate outsider, a falsetto-singing, ukulele-playing eccentric who seemed to exist in a different dimension than the rest of Hollywood. Miss Vicky was his 17-year-old bride, a girl who looked like she had stepped out of a Victorian painting. When Johnny Carson casually suggested they get married on his show, he likely expected a comedy bit. What he got instead was a cultural phenomenon that drew over 40 million viewers, a record for the era. It was a moment where the golden age of the variety show met the psychedelic weirdness of the late 60s in a collision of genuine romance and high camp. The ceremony itself was conducted with a surprising amount of sincerity. Despite the floral fever dream of the set and the inherent absurdity of the situation, the vows exchanged between the two felt real. The specific moment that captured the public's heart was the way Tiny Tim looked at his bride with a devotion that was entirely unironic. He wasn't playing a character. He was a man in love. Johnny, acting as the ultimate master of ceremonies, navigated the fine line between mockery and genuine support. providing a platform for two of society's most peculiar figures to find a moment of traditional belonging. It was a spectacle, yes, but it was also a story of two people who had found a temporary harbor in one another amidst the chaos of sudden, overwhelming fame. The broadcasts were overwhelming. The studio was transformed into a botanical garden, and the air was thick with the scent of thousands of lilies and the restless energy of a nation watching a private vow become a public commodity. There was a tragic irony in the scene. The couple was celebrating the most intimate moment of their lives in front of a voyeuristic audience of millions. You could sense a watchful, almost eerie presence in the way the cameras lingered on Miss Vicky's youthful face and Tiny Tim's trembling hands. The atmosphere was a mix of a circus and a cathedral, a chilling reminder of how quickly the personal can become the performative in the pursuit of ratings. The touching aspect to this surreal chapter was the fleeting nature of their happiness. While the wedding was a triumph of televised romance, it was followed by the heartbreak of a legacy that couldn't survive the reality of their differences. For all the kitsch and the ukulele strumming, it was a story of two outsiders trying to claim a piece of the American dream. Their time on The Tonight Show served as a heartbreaking reminder that love can be found in the most unlikely of places, even under the harsh, unyielding glare of a television studio. As the theme song fades and the studio lights are cut for the final time, we are left with the echoes of these encounters. Johnny Carson was a man who lived in the public eye, but remained a mystery to almost everyone who knew him. Perhaps these moments of romance, whether they were with starlets, singers, or protégés, were the only times the real Johnny actually stepped into the light. In the end, the legacy of The Tonight Show isn't just the jokes. It's the ghosts of the connections made in that fleeting hour before midnight. Was there a moment we missed? A guest who made Johnny blush even harder than Angie Dickinson? Drop your memories in the comments below. If you felt the chill of Bette Davis's final flame or the warmth of Ella's serenade, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. See you in the next video.